Global update. You can see we got a packed table tonight, so a little bit different than we've been doing. So we've got a guest with us, Josh.
Yes. It's about time we had a guest, I think.
I think so.
Good to be here.
All right. Is that mic working for you?
I think so.
All right. Good.
Sounds like it's coming through.
I'm just deaf. I can't hear. All right. Well, Nick and I had a little bit exchanged some text messages earlier in the day, and he actually has some very interesting things from Ukraine, and he can kind of go into how what he is comfortable telling about that. But when we're looking at the global picture, what's taking place, and then there's been a lot of misperceptions about what is truth, and it's very difficult to decipher when you're watching the media outlets as to, well, is what this side is saying true, or is this side saying what's true? So if you have a source, if you will, that can actually tell you what's truth, that's a very helpful scenario. So, Nick, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and I know some folks on the internet may not know who you are, so just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into some of the questions for tonight.
Sure. So my name is Nick Collins. I help run the live streaming here at Union Grove Baptist Church. But my day job, I'm a software developer. And in the course of my job, I work with other developers and engineers and stuff literally all over the globe. And a lot of the contractors that I've worked with happen to be in Ukraine, either in Lviv or Lviv, both those areas. And so I had an opportunity this morning to get on a Zoom call with about 30 of them to kind of find out, okay, what's really going on over there from people who are literally, living it right now.
All right, so that kind of sets that, and we're going to ask you a couple questions and see what information you can give, and then tell everybody who you are in case we got some new folks tonight watching. You.
Oh, sorry.
I already did that.
Oh, yeah. So
It's a long day, brother.
I'm Josh, and I don't pay attention very well, barely. So, yeah. So I'm Josh Steele. I'm the music director here. At least that's what they tell me.
Yeah, for now.
And so we're getting ready for our Easter cantata, actually, Hope in the Shadows. So we're looking forward to that. We're gearing up for that in a couple of weeks. But, yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Good to see you, Josh, and I'm Pastor Rich, senior pastor, not senior by age, of course, but
Of course not. Nope.
But senior pastor at Union Grove Baptist Church. So what we're going to do tonight, again, this is a Prophecy Focus Global Update for those watching on the internet, on our Prophecy Focus Facebook page, and our Union Grove Baptist Church page is a way to get in contact with us at any time. Of course, we always invite folks to be here at church, 9 a.m. service in Union Grove, Wisconsin. Sunday school for all ages at 10:45, and then we also have a 6 p.m. service on Sunday night. If while we're on for the next hour, between 7 and 8 p.m. Central Time, you'd like to text or a question or a comment, please feel free to do so. If we can't get to it today or during the 8 o'clock hour, we'll answer it afterwards. Just a little teaser. Sunday mornings right now, we're getting set for moving towards the resurrection Sunday being Easter, and we're going through a series called Jesus' Journey Towards Our Justification. This Sunday is a very interesting one because we're going to go through the three trials that Jesus went through, and we're also going to go through the three hearings that he went through. So he has 3 hearings, 3 trials, 6 different illegal things that take place, and if you've never heard that expounded upon, you can hear it this Sunday right here. All right, so we're going to pop into our first segment this evening, and again, good to have Nick Collins here. He's just been an absolute godsend for us. We started out our internet ministry with an iPhone, and Nick has now designed a massive amount of goods and so forth. Folks have been just donated a ton of stuff, and Nick has put it to wonderful use and really made us have a nice, robust system here at Union Grove Baptist. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick and let him basically explain the things that he introduced us with. If you missed the first part of the opening, he's been in Zoom meetings with about 30 different individuals that are in the software development field, if you will, down in Ukraine. And of course, he's getting some firsthand reports of some things taking place. So Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you. Feel free to tell us whatever you'd like to, and then if we have questions, we'll do that before we pop into our next segment.
Sure. So I need to be very careful about what kind of information I disclose. I want to make sure that their identities are protected. So I'm going to kind of leave out any names and things like that. But I had opportunity this morning, like I mentioned, to have a Zoom call with about 30 other engineers who they're currently now in the Lviv area. Some of them were in Kyiv, but have had to relocate because of what's going on there right now. I think probably the biggest thing that shocked me was just how good of spirits they were in, actually. They were very upbeat. You see the things on the news, it looks like a war zone over there, because many parts are, but most of that, from what they were telling me, is in the eastern part of Ukraine. They're in the western part where they are, for the most part, it's kind of life is normal. And they're all going to their normal jobs and doing their normal thing. Now, of course, people in certain areas are helping with the war effort. It was very reminiscent to me of, the stories you see of U.S. in World War II. Everyone's doing their part, but at the same time, a lot of people are just going about doing their everyday, duties. What was also interesting to me is one of the questions that was posed to them is, what is their view of President Zelensky now, or Zelensky rather. A lot of them said, before this, they saw him as a comedian, an actor, no one to be taken really seriously, just a puppet for a lot of the Russian kind of leading politicians in the area. They viewed him as being weak, and now they see him as a national hero. They're really rallying behind him. One of the things they repeatedly said was, the thing about Ukrainians is, we can, be upset with our president. We can, yell at him. We can be mad at him. We can, fight over politics and all this stuff, sound familiar. But at the end of the day, we're in a war right now. All that gets put on the back burner. Right now, we're Ukrainians. We're going to fight for Ukraine. And then when we're done with this war, then we'll go back to fighting about other stuff. Which, it was very interesting to me. It's like, oh, man, this sounds really familiar. Another thing that they mention is that, now a lot of this is their personal opinion, of course, but, they really do not want the U.S. or NATO to be directly involved. They do not want our troops over there. They do not want us getting involved because, in their view, if we go over there, it's going to destroy the Ukraine. They said if we're involved, if we have troops over there, their cities are going to end up destroyed. It's just going to end up wiping out the country. It will no longer exist as it is today. They're like, hey, we have enough people here willing to fight. Send us humanitarian aid, pray for us, send us, equipment and goods to help us indirectly, but we don't want your troops. Especially like things with like the jets that, were offered by, I think it was Poland. They said, we would love to have the jets. We have plenty of pilots. We just need the equipment. And they really want to do things themselves. Another interesting thing is, I think there was a news report that came out this weekend that one of the Russian news outlets had slipped up and let the news out about how many Russians have been killed so far. I believe it's somewhere close to 10,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in this war, and over 15,000, I think it's actually over 16,000 have been injured, which according to their numbers is about 25% of their military has been, basically taken out of commission by the Ukrainians, and then it was very quickly taken down. Now, this is something that has been very encouraging to the Ukrainians, of course, and the way they explained it when we were asking, to tell us about this is, there's a very different perspective. For the Ukrainians, they said, hey, if I go out there and I die for my country, there's 100 guys already waiting in line behind me to pick up my gun and take my place. Whereas the Russian soldiers, that is not the case. Many of them are basically going in knowing that they're probably going to die, and that's just the fact of life for them. I'm trying to remember, one of the other things they mentioned is that they really do want the no-fly zone, because right now, because Russia has had so much attrition on the ground, they're really focusing on the airstrikes and the air attacks. And so if they get a no-fly zone in effect, then that will really cripple Russia's ability to be able to launch those strikes. Now, one of the questions that we asked them was, what do you guys feel this war is about? Is this about trying to get your natural resources, which Ukraine is very rich in? Is this about just wanting to, reestablish the USSR? What do you guys feel this is about? And after thinking about it for a moment, one of the gentlemen spoke up. He said, this isn't really a war over land. This is not a war between nations. This is an ideological war. And what it is that you have the Russian, the socialistic mentality that has seen how that plays out. The majority of Russia is very, very poor. There's a lot of poverty outside of the cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, where the wealth is concentrated. And in those areas, they do not have access to public internet like we have, where you can subscribe to any of a half a dozen different internet providers around here. They have one provider, and it's run by the state for the majority of the country. And so their information only comes from the state. That is the only source they have. And the Russian propaganda machine has been going strong for decades now there. So you have generations that have grown up where that is the only news source they have ever known, without any access to other news. Their view of the Ukraine is that Ukrainians have stolen their wealth from them because of the propaganda. And so they are very, very cold and callous towards the Ukrainians. I guess one of the soldiers, there was an intercept of a phone conversation between one of the Russian soldiers and his wife, that the Ukrainians, they've been leaking out some of the intelligence information to the public so they know kind of what's going on. And they leaked out this recording of a phone conversation between a Russian soldier and his wife, where the Russian soldier was conveying that he had shot and killed several civilians that day, but it was okay because he was able to recover about $5,000 from them afterwards. His wife was like, well, make sure you don't lose the $5,000 because we're low on sugar. There was zero regard for the life loss, that they were civilians. No regard for that at all whatsoever. It was strictly, well, hey, get whatever you can from them. This is like a looting job, right? Which I found very, very sad that, they had become so cold and callous that they thought that was just normal as rain. Trying to think if there's anything else that I can share. One other thing they mentioned about the propaganda is that, in other areas, we at least try to tell shades of the truth. The example he gave was that, you and I might look at the sky and, say, I might say that's dark blue. You might say, well, that's light blue, maybe more of a turquoise. But at the end of the day, we can both agree that it's still some kind of blue. It said over there, they don't even try to pretend to tell any shade of the truth. They tell the complete opposite of the truth. They'll say the sky is red, and they'll keep saying it until everyone repeats back that the sky is red. I guess one of the things that's interesting in Ukraine is because they are so close to Russia, they are able to pick up a lot of like the terrestrial broadcasts. Like you might, with a satellite dish around here, pick up stuff from Chicago or Milwaukee. They can pick up the same things from Russia, so they can see what their state media in Russia is putting out, but they can't influence any of it. So one of the things I know that they said that they really want to see is more efforts being done to try and get the truth out to the Russian people. They said some of the people in the bigger cities are tech savvy enough to use things like VPNs and things like that to be able to get news from outside the state sources, and a lot of them are seeing the effects of the sanctions and things like that, and starting to put two and two together. But the vast majority of the country does not have access to that technology or information, and are very much being kept in the dark. And so the Ukrainians feel that the more people in Russia can be exposed to the truth, then the better it will be for everybody overall.
All right, we'll field questions just in case you have something. And again, Nick has to be cautious as to what he answers, but you might have something out there that he can't answer.
Someone over here.
Yes.
They didn't mention anything about him, no.
What was the question I didn't hear?
They had any word on Alexei Navalny?
Oh, okay.
Naval.
Okay. All right. All right, thank you. I have a question, and I don't know if the subject of Christianity, or I'll use the loose term of religion, anything that's coming in about that at all as to any issues?
Because it was kind of like a workplace discussion, that wasn't really brought up, other than they do say that they do appreciate all the word that they're getting from other people through Facebook and things like that. You know, people saying, "Hey, we're praying for you guys. We care about you." They said that has meant the world to them. Okay. So they do appreciate and covet people's prayers. I believe most of them are Russian Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox, in as far as their religious beliefs. But we didn't really get into a deep discussion about it because it was like a corporate sponsored event.
I kind of figured that, but you never know. So I figured I'd ask. Anyone else got anything they want to throw out there? Okay. Question for those watching: was there any issue with the Ukrainians regarding the nuclear weapons, fears, and so forth?
So that did kind of come up a little bit, not necessarily about chemical weapons, but about the nuclear option there. And they were very encouraged that they would be able to keep the Russians back before they got to any of the larger nuclear reactors. They mentioned that on the western side of Ukraine, they have some nuclear reactors that make Chernobyl look like a piker, and so they're fairly confident that the Ukrainian military and people will be able to prevent the Russians from being able to get that far. But at the same time, they are cautiously eyeing things because they don't know if any day if Putin and the Russian army could come in through Belarus or from some other vector that they're not currently aware of. Right now, they've been able to keep them pretty much focused on the eastern part of the Ukraine, but so they're kind of being cautiously optimistic that they'll be able to keep them back. But right now they're kind of like, at the end of the day, it's anyone's guess what's going to happen tomorrow.
Kind of push that a little bit further. What about the issue of Russia using nuclear weapons or biological weapons on Ukraine? Anything about that at all?
They don't believe that Putin is, for lack of a better term, and this is the terminology they use, they don't believe he's crazy enough to actually push the button. Apparently, and this is what their intelligence is telling them. I don't have any confirmation of this myself, but Putin himself cannot unilaterally direct a nuclear strike. He cannot push a button and make it happen. It requires 4 other specific men to be in the room to be able to launch a strike. And so they would all 4 have to be willing to go along with him to do that. Okay. So I think the Ukrainians they have a lot of hope that at least one of those 4 men will say, no, we can't do this because this is going to bring everybody down on us.
Yep. Good. Anyone else before we move on? All right, Nick, well, thanks so much for sharing that. That's good information. And again, it's straight out of Ukraine, so you don't get much better than that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So appreciate it. All right, well, let's go to our next segment. And I want to highlight two things that really are not on our normal slides. These things just came in, and Nick, if you want to contribute as well today, but I want to go to an issue that's plaguing America, plaguing the world, and obviously plaguing Ukraine right now. But I've got a headlines from the New York Times that states this: Good morning. A violent weekend highlights America's continuing crime wave, 9 mass shootings. Now, we're not talking about 9, if you will, single assaults. We're talking about 9 mass shootings that took place over the weekend. So, Josh, and the reason we look at this is because 2 Timothy warns us about lawlessness that will come in the last days before Christ returns. And this just accentuates what's taking place. So, if you wouldn't mind, that would be helpful.
Let's see. Many crime experts define a mass shooting as an event in which 4 or more people are shot. Last weekend, there were a shocking number of them, at least 9 across the U.S. In Norfolk, Virginia, an argument outside a pizzeria led to a shooting that killed 2 people, including a 25-year-old newspaper reporter who was a bystander. In the farming community of Dumas, Arkansas, a gunfight broke out at an annual car show, killing 1 person, injuring 27. In downtown Austin, Texas, 4 people suffered gunshot wounds during the final weekend of the SXSW Festival. The burst of weekend violence continues a trend that began almost 2 years ago, early in the COVID-19 pandemic, shows no signs of easing, as has been reported. Murders have risen more than 30% since 2019, recent data suggests. They are still far below the levels of the 1970s, 80s, and early 90s, but have reached the highest point in more than 2 decades. We can't endure this anymore. We simply can't. Dan Gelber, the mayor of Miami Beach, said after 2 shootings last weekend led the city to impose a midnight curfew. What explains the crime wave? There's no fully satisfying answer, but experts point to several plausible partial explanations. They include social isolation, frustration caused by the pandemic, a sense of lawlessness stemming from police violence like the murder of George Floyd, police officers' timidity in response to recent criticism of them, and a rise in gun sales during the pandemic. Yet the crime wave seems both too broad and too distinctly American for any one of these factors to be a tidy explanation.
All right, so the bottom line is, and this is unfortunately nothing new, back when I was still with the sheriff's office, I was constantly getting asked to go to churches, groups, organizations. How do we defend ourselves against active shooters? Obviously, it's still a major issue today. From both your guys' perspective, from your perspective, why do you think violence is becoming an out-of-control issue again?
I think people are desperate for safety and for control, perhaps. There's a sense, like it said in the article, there is a sense of lawlessness that is kind of permeating into the culture, that I think drives a lot of the violence.
Yeah.
I think there's also a sense of desperation, a lack of trust in the leadership and law enforcement as a whole. Even if the law enforcement officers are doing their jobs effectively, and there's a lot of good men and women out there doing that, then you see, and especially in certain areas, the attorney general is just turning around and tossing the cases out, not prosecuting them, and so those criminals end up right back in the streets. With some of these, the cash bail issues and things like that, it makes people think, well, what's the point if the police arrest them if they end up, back out tomorrow? And so I think there's a certain sense of desperation that goes along with that as well, and a degree of, probably vigilantism that kind of rises up. People say, well, if the law enforcement can't do the job and keep us safe, then somebody has to. And we saw that a lot in Kenosha,
Yep. All right, so when we were this, actually, it sounds maybe a little trite, but it's not. When you look at child rearing, when a child does something, let's just use a simplistic example. A child goes and steals the cookie from the proverbial cookie jar, right? I mean, they just take it and they walk in and you see them and there's cookie crumbs all over their face, and you say, you know, Junior, Juniorette, did you take a cookie? And what's the answer?
No.
Whether it's still half
What
in
cookie?
their mouth. Yeah, what cookie? And the issue is, okay, so if you will, the punishment or how you correct that person, it's like, okay, sometimes a growly look at them is enough to get them to break down, and it's like, done, okay, sorry, shouldn't have done that. Others, it's like the pleasure of the crime, so to speak, is much more inviting than the punishment that they're about to get. So the next time they see the cookie in the cookie jar, they're thinking, if I get yelled at or whatever, it's okay. So
Worth
go
it.
for it. Say what?
Say, it's worth it.
It's worth it. And that's exactly what's happened. One of the many factors, in addition to what's been said, that's causing the problems, because the punishment isn't feel worse, if you will, than the pleasure it gets from the criminal act. You let the criminals out after a little slap on the wrist, they go right back and do it again. So it's the lawlessness issue. It's a biblical problem, according to 2 Timothy. It's not surprising at all that these things are taking place. Let's go to one other story that just came out, which we didn't even have time to get on the slides today, but 4 Israelis dead, 2 wounded after ram and stab terror attack in Beersheba. Now, Beersheba is at the southern end of Israel, and Josh, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of fill the folks in on this one, and then we can comment.
Says 4 people have died and 2 others were reported serious but stable condition after an Arab terrorist attack Tuesday outside the big shopping center on Hebron Road in Beersheba. The Arab terrorist first stabbed a woman, then returned to his vehicle, ran over a man riding a bike before exiting the vehicle to stab others. He was shot by Eged bus driver and father of 5, Arthur Haimov of Dimona, and a second armed civilian. Haimov told Israel's Channel 12 that he tried repeatedly to talk the terrorist down, but he refused to drop the knife and lunged at him instead. One victim was declared dead at the scene after efforts to resuscitate her failed.
All right, that's good enough just to get the picture. So when we're looking at, again, this is an Islamic Jewish issue. When they're talking about Hebron, Hebron is a major Palestinian area. There are some Jewish people that, despite knowing that it's a very, very difficult place for a Jewish person to live, still live in the area. So you've got these constant conflicts. But again, it just goes to the fact we're seeing violence everywhere. We're seeing the Jew versus the Islamic world is a constant problem. So it's nothing new, but it just accentuates this weekend was a really, really bad one.
You know, there's this phrase keeps going around, cancel culture. Mm-hmm. And this, I think what we're seeing is cancel culture taken to its extreme end. Because if you don't like somebody or something, you cancel them. And I think, you know, murder is at the far end of that canceling.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of the ultimate.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, we're going to pop through about 4 stories, and then we're going to come. I had this question posed to me the other day, and I found it a fascinating question because I never really thought about it. When we're looking at a biblical sense, and we've been talking about globalism quite a bit, and of course this is called Prophecy Focus Global Update. So the issue is we're constantly stating up here that globalism is it's not a good thing. It's something that, of course, the Antichrist will use to his advantage once everything falls under a one-world system. So the question was posed to me, wait a second. When Christ comes at his second advent, isn't he setting up a global system, and is that a good thing? And it's like, okay, I mean, I never looked at it from that perspective, but when we're looking at when Jesus Christ returns and sets up his millennial kingdom here on earth, is that a good or a bad thing? Well, I think we can state it's a good thing, but we're going to explain why it's a good thing versus the globalism that, if you will, the Antichrist and the world system is setting up. So we'll take some time on that. So we're going to kind of fly through these couple of stories. We're half an hour in, so we'll do maybe 15 minutes or so on these stories, and then we'll pop into and have a nice little Bible study about why is the kingdom, when Jesus was running the kingdom, a good thing? All right, first one that we have, 750,000 Jewish men at a rabbi's funeral. So if you want to read through that for us.
On Friday, March 18th, at Beni Barak, a city near Tel Aviv, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, I think that's how you say it, passed away at age of 94. I'm sure that means very little to you unless you are an ultra-Orthodox Jew whose life is dedicated to the study of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. Your life will not have intersected with Rabbi Kanievsky's. However, he was important enough to Israel's ultra-Orthodox community that on Sunday, over 750,000 men, or almost 8.5% of Israel's total population, poured into the streets of Beni Barak to be part of his funeral. Still, why should that matter to you? It matters because a religious text that's around 2,500 years old in its present form and existed in other forms before then, and that recognizes and seeks to tame and elevate human behavior, has such power. Compared to that, today's waskim, firmly grounded in fantasy, cannot and will not last.
All right, so when we look at the screen right now, and it's a very grainy picture, so it didn't come out too well, but all that black mass that you see in the streets are that nearly 750,000 Jewish men that are there. Now, again, when you're in this particular part of the world, if you're coming to a funeral, there's everybody, men usually wear black to start with, Orthodox Jewish men. They all wear a black hat unless on occasion there's 2 different major groups of Jewish people called the Sephardic and help me out, and Ashkenazi, so Sephardic and Ashkenazi groups, which will wear different colored hats, if you will, different style hats, not necessarily color different. Some of them are a little bit lighter. But bottom line is 750,000 Jewish men show up for one rabbi's funeral.
That's huge.
That's an amazing thing. You think about somebody the stature like a Billy Graham or somebody like that in America, and he probably those type of people with that type of notoriety will get a good crowd. But just your perspective, why would the Jewish people have such a massive turnout for an individual like this? Any ideas?
Well, I mean, he's obviously dedicated his entire life to studying Torah, and to them, it seems like a national hero, perhaps, or at least a religiously national hero, and they want to honor him.
There you go. Nick, anything?
Yeah, I think a lot of that, perhaps he could even have a certain degree of celebrity among that group of people. I saw a little bit of that in Detroit when I lived there. Happened to be working downtown during the Rosa Parks funeral. And, it was a very similar scene where it was just crowds and crowds of people as far as the eye could see.
Wow.
Yep. All right. Well, let's move on to our next one. Again, we're talking about globalism, what's taking place. I had a couple of people send me this particular link regarding President Biden making some very strong statements about the coming New World Order, of which he believes America should be the operative group. So be story number 2, if you want to take us through that.
President Biden, the former senator from Delaware, addressed the Business Roundtable on Monday afternoon. Quote, "We're at an inflection point, I believe, in the world economy. Not just the world economy, the world, that occurs every 3 or 4 generations," the president said. A general told me that 60 million people died between 1900 and 1946, and since then we've established a liberal world order, and it hasn't happened in a long while. A lot of people died, but nowhere near the chaos. Now is the time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. We've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it.
All right, now this is, you could talk about this till all night as to what in the world is meant by all this. Looking back at what he called a previous world order, I'm not even 100% sure what is meant by that. I don't know if you guys got any ideas.
Not really. I was having a hard time understanding that.
I'm going to open it up because we got a couple minutes. Anybody got any input you want to throw into this one? Okay. That one kind of took me a little bit by surprise. Like, well, what actually is meant by that? And not sure. Now, what we dead sure can at least speculate about is what is going to be the new world order, of which our current president would love to be a major factor in that, at least on paper. So interesting.
I watched some commentary on this. A guy on YouTube was talking about it. I'll call him a Christian guy, and he made a statement. I want to see what you think of it. He said, "God divides, Satan unites." And I'm not sure what I think of that. I kind of understand where he's coming from. I wonder, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I guess the simplistic answer to that is, how many people are interested in hearing the gospel today? Yeah, the answer was not as many as should. The gospel is, and again, I go back to, and I keep repeating this thing, when President Obama was in office and he made the statement that America is now a post-Christian nation, or in a post-Christian era. That's the first time, again, since America was founded, that statement even had any validity. Regardless of whether folks are Bible-believing Christians, well over 50% of Americans always identified, if you will, as being a Christian, even if it's not a Bible-believing Christian like we have here at Union Grove Baptist Church. So it's very disturbing as to the rapidity, if you will, or the rapidness of watching America with our current presidential leader saying, man, we got to go global, we got to have this global agenda. And of course, that just feeds right into Revelation 13. So,
perhaps that's the transition that he was talking about. The transition from a Christian nation to the post-Christian.
Yeah. And we're headed there, folks, definitely, if not already there. All right, let's move on to our next one. Let's talk a little bit about Russia warns the United States, we have the might to put you in your place. I'm not sure if that's tough words, or well, let's see what the news has to say here.
Russia warned the United States on Thursday that Moscow had the might to put the world's preeminent superpower in its place, and accused the West of stoking a wild Russophobic plot to tear Russia apart. Dmitry Medvedev, who served as president from 2008 to 2012 and is now deputy secretary of Russia's Security Council, said the United States had stoked disgusting Russophobia in an attempt to force Russia to its knees. It will not work. Russia has the might to put all of our brash enemies in their place, Medvedev said. Since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, the United States and its European Asian allies have slapped sanctions on Russian leaders, companies, and businessmen, cutting off Russia from much of the world economy.
All right, so when we examine that, so Russia basically flexing its muscles right now, while they're basically, as we've been finding out, having an extremely difficult time getting control of one country. So the only thing that I can see on the table from a big perspective is those nuclear weapons. I mean, outside of nuclear weaponry, obviously their troops are ineffective, their ground game is ineffective, even to some degree their air game has been ineffective. So I see you're ready to say something here. Go for it.
Well, I'm thinking, if the Ukraine is able to hold off the Russian army, compare that to the United States army that is probably, 10, 20 plus times the size of the Ukrainian army. And these are, the trained fighters, not just the citizens picking up the guns. Now, Russia kind of said the same thing in the 80s too, and that didn't work out so well for them back then. But it could be a very different story now with the nukes in game.
Yep. And again, when somebody tells you they're going to beat you up and you think they've got a whole lot of major power behind them, and all of a sudden when the war's taking place, and quite frankly, I mean, are they effective? Somewhat, but nowhere near what I anticipated Russia walking in there and just storming them apart. Yeah. I'm shocked by the lack of effectiveness that they've had. So interesting words that Russia, of course, has to put up a front that, hey, we're as strong and as powerful as ever. again, that's what is truth, right? All right, next one real quick here. New Iran agreement. This is really getting ramped up again in government. Again, why do we care about Iran? Because we know from, again, the Ezekiel 38 passages, Iran becomes a major player, along with Russia, along with China, along with Egypt, along with all the nations that surround Israel. So these are huge things that get our attention. So we like to keep this news in front of you because it is leading towards that picture, the biblical picture, the prophetic scenario that we so often talk about. So Josh, take away this piece here, please.
Russia's top state-controlled energy company is set to cash in on a $10 billion contract to build out one of Iran's most contested nuclear sites as part of concessions granted in the soon-to-be-announced nuclear agreement that will guarantee sanctions on both countries are lifted. Russian and Iranian documents translated for the Washington Free Beacon show that Rosatom, Russia's leading energy company, has a $10 billion contract with Iran's Atomic Energy Organization to expand Tehran's Bushehr nuclear plant. Russia and the Biden administration confirmed on Tuesday that the new nuclear agreement includes caveats that will waive sanctions on both countries so that Russia can make good on its contract. We, of course, would not sanction Russian participation in nuclear projects that are part of resuming full implementation of the JCPOA, State Department spokesman Ned Price confirmed on Tuesday, referring to the original 2015 nuclear accord. Russia's foreign ministry made a similar statement on Tuesday, saying that additions were made to the text of the future agreement on that agreement restoration to ensure that the related projects, as well as are protected from negative impact of anti-Russian restrictions by the United States and European Union.
All right, so again, nothing new, but it just keeps ramping up. This Iran deal, of course, we're going to actually do one or two other quick popcorn type things. If you want to go to page 8. Next one is United States prepared to sign major appeasement deal with Iran. And of course, the first thing out of those of us who are red-blooded Americans are, why are we trying to appease Iran? And by giving them more power and more strength and more weapons. And here's the answer.
It almost looks as if the United States is content with enabling the worst elements of the regime to enrich and to continue their crimes against humanity, said Jonathan Skanzer, Senior Vice President for Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. As the Biden administration prepares to sign a final deal with Iran that has been lambasted by numerous experts as nothing short of a major appeasement of the Islamic regime, Washington is now also weighing the removal of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps from terror blacklist in return for a public commitment from Iran to de-escalation in the region.
All right, we're going to go to another one real quick here. Let's go to the press secretary, and there's a couple pages in here, I think page 13. Let's see. Yes.
Well, you know, if they promise to be nice, I'm sure they'll honor that.
Oh, yeah.
Of course. No, I promise. So here's from the president's press secretary, just a couple of lines about Psaki defends the Iran deal is based on what's in the best interest of us and allies. Got me on that one, but go ahead.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki promised that negotiations on the Iran nuclear deal would reflect the best interests of the United States and its allies, despite criticism from some corners. Let's see, I'm going to quote her down here. She says, I'd say we are in regular touch with our Israeli counterparts, including leaders, she said. We don't have a deal yet. We're consulting with our allies and partners, including Israel, as we negotiate, and the president is going to make a decision on whether to re-enter the deal based on what's in the best interest of American security and strategic interests.
Oh, read the next line, please.
Okay. That includes the security of our partners in regions like Israel, Psaki added. If and when we have a deal, I'm sure we can discuss more specifics.
All right, so folks, you're looking at this. Most of you here would consider yourself conservatives, and you're like, okay, look what's happening. We don't like what's happening. Some may not have a horse in the race, so to speak. But here's the question for us that have cell phones and have pens and have an opinion. should you exercise your right from the First Amendment to let the government know when you're not happy with what it's doing?
Yes.
Is that appropriate?
Yes.
Absolutely.
So. You got that constitutional right. Now, on the other hand, when we look at things from a Christian perspective, Romans 13, which basically admonishes us not to, if you will, be unkind to the government, but if someone is doing, okay, let's just take it down to the family level. If someone in your family is actually doing something wrong and you have the ability to potentially correct it in a nice and kind way, would you do it? Absolutely. Yes. How about in the workplace?
Happens all the time.
Right. I mean, it's just part of good management, good supervision, and so forth. Well, folks, you have the right. This isn't wrong biblically to exercise your rights to make a redress. That's constitutional.
It's a stewardship issue is what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. So all I can do, and you say, well, will it do any good? Doesn't matter if it does any good or not. We do our part. In other words, you also tell the gospel to somebody. You can't make the decision for them to trust Christ. It's the same thing with the government. You can give your opinion. If 1 million of us, or 8 million, or 1 billion people said this is not the direction we believe is right, you might get a detention. But, of course, the issue is we're lucky to get 100 people to write those letters. But I encourage you to do that. I call Senator Johnson. Do I get him on the phone? No, but I leave messages for him constantly. I call Brian Stile all the time. Others that it's like, okay, they may not be able to do a thing about it, but bam, let your opinion be known. They're elected officials. It's their duty to listen to you. All right, we're going to pop into our next section here. And let's talk a bit, and there's no notes on this, guys. We're going to talk a bit from, we want to spend the last 13 minutes or so going through some scriptures regarding God's millennial kingdom that's coming. So again, Josh, if you got Revelation 20 verses 1 to 7, let's read that to set the context. Again, there is a massive amount of scripture from the Old Testament, the Gospels, all the way through the New Testament, speaking about God's millennial kingdom. So the question, again, if you haven't heard it, came tuning in a little bit later in our, what do we call this, program? Update, there we go, our update. Is this. We're looking at the question of globalism from a secular perspective is a bad thing. We know that the Antichrist is going to come, set up his one world kingdom during the first, actually it really kicks in the last half of the 7-year tribulation period. Jesus comes back now, and the issue is he promises, as we're going to read here, to set up a 1,000-year kingdom on earth that he's literally the theocratic ruler of. And we're going to read it in just a second. Think about before Adam and Eve sinned. Who was in charge of the entire world before sin entered in?
Adam.
Who was?
Adam.
God.
Let's go up a notch.
God
the Father.
Right? Okay, now he gave dominion to Adam and Eve, but he was still the theocratic ruler of the world. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, a very important verse, 2 Corinthians 4:4, makes it very clear that there is, if you will, a small g God of this world today. That's operative. So when we look at the world, why is the world so messed up? Why do we have all the chaos? Why are we going through all these global issues that are going in a bad way? 2 Corinthians 4:4. Satan rebelled. He's now, and God has given him a tremendous amount of latitude, if you will, to be the small g God of this world. So he does have a tremendous amount of latitude, power, and we're seeing the corruption that's as a result of it. Now, when Jesus comes back, and we're going to read it here, we're going to see things are going to massively change, and the kingdom that God is going to set up is going to go right back to what the original plan was. God theocratic, and that's a big word, but it's very important. God is the theocratic ruler before, if you will, sin enters in, and all of a sudden the sin messes up his perfect world. When Jesus returns, it will return to the theocratic ruler who will now be in his place and will rule with a rod of what? Iron, right? Bam. I mean, he's coming down. When the kingdom starts, it's going to be perfect peace, but people will be born. There's going to be problems. And I'll be quiet so you can read the text.
Okay. Revelation 21 through 6?
7.
Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up, and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things he must be released for a little while. And I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead did not live again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he who has part in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. Now when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison.
All right, finish up the next 3 more verses.
And will go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, whose number is as the sand of the sea. They went up on the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints in the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. The devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever.
All right, so there's some issues here that are let's say, hard theological challenges in this passage. The specific one being a particular phrase that you've heard many times about Ezekiel 38, which is what? Gog and Magog, all right? So I'll give you just the quick view of that, but I want to get back to the other part to basically talk about the kingdom. When we're talking about that final battle, if you will, at the end of the 1,000-year time period, it's not the same one as Ezekiel 38 when the nations that surround Israel attack her in Ezekiel 38. The Revelation one, except for one or two commentators, and some of you have a study Bible that will disagree with this, but that person's opinion is in the vast minority. MacArthur believes that Ezekiel 38 and 39 refer to this same battle. And I like John on the most part, but I disagree with him, as most scholars do on that particular point. But we're looking at Gog Magog again. It's going to be a battle where the interesting point about that is Jesus Christ is ruling and reigning at the beginning of the Millennial Kingdom. It's his place. All of a sudden, now we go down through verse 8. Everything's going. He's talking about the first resurrection. All of God's people have been resurrected to rule and reign with him. Is that a good thing?
Yes.
It's a great thing, right? I mean, we're all looking forward to that someday. Then we have, and why is there going to be, as you just read in verses 8 through 10, this massive amount of people that are going to rise up and fight against God at the end? Well, and here's the simplicity of it. When you go to Matthew chapter 24 and 25, and we find out who's going to enter into the Millennial Kingdom after the 7-year tribulation period. All of the saved individuals, if you will, all of the Jewish remnant that managed to survive through the tribulation, Zechariah 13, 8, and 9, 1/3 of the Jewish people survived. They're going to, in all likelihood, remain in normal bodies, and they'll be having children during that 1,000 years. The Bible talks in Matthew chapter 25 about the sheep and the goat judgment, where Gentile nations are judged, and there are definitely some Gentiles that somehow managed to survive through the tribulation period, have to go underground somehow. They're going to enter into that 1,000-year millennial kingdom. So 1,000 years of people having children is going to produce quite a few babies. Mm-hmm. And God is stating here, who's on the throne at this point? Jesus himself is there. Where's Satan?
Bound.
He's bound up. He's locked down, if you will, in the pit for that 1,000-year period. With Satan is still locked up, according to this passage, will there still be a strong sinful presence?
Yes.
Absolutely there will. So it's very interesting because we look at God's theocratic kingdom where he says what? I'm going to rule with a rod of iron, and he's actually going to need that at points because people will rebel. Isaiah tells us that a child will die at 100 years old during that time. You know why a child will die at 100? And they're not they're 100 years old, but they'll live to be upwards of 1,000 years old. You say, that's crazy. Nobody can live to be 1,000 years old. Who's the oldest person that ever lived on this earth?
Methuselah.
Methuselah, how old was he? 969 years old when he died. Is our physical body, barring that God doesn't take your life ahead of time, capable of going 1,000 years? What's the answer?
Yeah.
Absolutely. It sounds crazy because how long after Adam's sin, God all of a sudden said a little bit later that he reduced the lifespan. There's two different times God reduces the lifespan. What was the first reduction to how many years? 120 years is correct. Then he reduced it again. What was the next one? 70 years, 70 in your King James Bible. So God reduced lifespan based on what?
Sin.
Sin. That's it. I mean, it's just simple. God said, if you're going to keep messing up, you're going to keep doing wrong, I'll just keep reducing your lifespan. Well, in the millennium, he reverts it right back to what we had in Genesis and says, fine, you can live 1,000 years, but don't cross me. So that's what's coming. All right, so we got a couple minutes left. I want to bring out a couple of things about the Millennial Kingdom. First of all, I just love that picture because that's the battlefield of Armageddon. When Jesus Christ returns, Revelation 19:11-21, he touches down, if you will, on the Mount of Olives. He then goes out to the battlefield of Armageddon, wipes out the soldiers that have been gathered there from all the nations, Zechariah 14:1-4, wipes them out, and then he sets up his 1,000-year millennial kingdom. All right, we're going to skip through this and just get to a couple of the highlights. We already did that. So what I want to get us to is what's going to be taking place during the millennium. First of all, and Josh, I think you may have this on yours. This should be on your PowerPoint. The theocratic ruler. Again, the lesson for tonight is when Jesus takes over and once again takes his rightful spot as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Is that how he comes back? Revelation 19. It makes it very clear when Jesus comes back, he will once again have the title of King of all kings, Lord of all lords. So that is coming. We have multiple passages to back that up. The one, and I guess we won't get too much further than this, but Josh, just this wonderful passage that reminds us not only of Christmas time, but what God is going to do in the form of Jesus Christ when he returns to set up that kingdom.
Isaiah 9:6, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. All right,
so we have the 1,000-year time when Jesus sets up his kingdom on earth. However, the Bible talks about it being forever. Is it only going to be a 1,000-year kingdom that Jesus has and then it's all done?
Nope.
Well, we go into eternity future where Jesus Christ, of course, will be the ruler over eternity, if you will. All right, we're going to close out with just a list of things that will be taking place. And then we'll close out. But here's a couple of things. The productive and peaceful environment of that 1,000-year kingdom. Number one, extreme environment of longevity of life. Isaiah 65:20. Again, a child will die at 100 years old, not because they're teeny tiny. We're not talking about that child. But technically, every single person has the ability to live to 1,000 years unless God decides to take their life because of gross rebellion against him. It's an environment of peace. In other words, there won't be wars and rumors of wars and conflicts and kingdom against kingdom. like will take place during the tribulation time. It'll be a place of peace because the true King of Kings will be ruling here. It's an environment of productive building and agriculture. It talks about the fields in Israel will bloom with blossoms, and Israel, which is mainly a desert place now, will be just absolutely gorgeous and lush, like you were in Hawaii, if you will. An environment of worship where God says every single person will know who I am and people will come to worship me. So when you think about, just to finally answer the question, is God's kingdom going to be exactly what he envisioned? Is it a kingdom that's ruled by a theocratic ruler who loves people and will, if you will, punish those who refuse to follow him and keep the place as pure as possible? Absolutely. So it's a wonderful, wonderful time that we all have to look forward to. For you sitting in the room, those watching, if you've trusted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, the next major event on God's prophetic calendar is the rapture of the church, when he'll take us up to be with him. 1 Corinthians 15:50-54. Satan will sign, or Antichrist will, empowered by Satan, will sign a 7-year peace treaty with Israel. The Antichrist will break in the middle of the 3.5 years, set up his one world system, one world government, one world religion, one world economy, and we're seeing the stage being set for that as we speak today. That's what we've been talking about. Then at the end of that 7-year period, Jesus Christ comes back, wipes out all those who offend him, sets up his 1,000-year wonderful theocratic millennial kingdom that every single one of us will be a part of. If you're a Christian, you'll be there in a glorified body, ruling and reigning with Christ. Those that are born subsequent to our rapture, they'll be there in physical human bodies. Unless they were martyred, then they'll also come back and rule and reign with Christ in glorified bodies. All right, lots of stuff in 1 hour. Thanks, Nick, for filling in today and the great report you gave us. Josh, thanks as always. Would you mind closing us out?
Sure. Father, we just thank you so much for the time we've been able to spend together tonight, looking at these different events happening on the global scale. Please, and we also thank you for the time spent in your word here at the end, thinking about your kingdom and the wonderful thing that will be and all the things that will happen. Father, please help us to continue to be faithful to you right now, Lord, while we're waiting for you to return. Please help us to continue to be faithful in prayer and in the study of your word and in sharing the love of God with others. We pray this in Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks, folks, for coming out on a rainy night, and we'll see you Sunday morning.